Today we're interviewing J.B. Tate. This is November 10th, 2013. We're in the Tate household in Cartersville. I'm Tom Scott, and the interview is for the Etowah Valley Historical Society. J.B., I know you came from Oklahoma. I think you were born in the late 30s, 1930s sometime. I know that you've always been interested in the history of the Cherokee Indians and the Trail of Tears and all of that, and having an Oklahoma background may actually have something to do with that. So why don't you talk a little bit about where you grew up and, you know, your early schooling and the community and maybe some of the people that you knew and so on.
Yeah, I came from a little town in Oklahoma called Fairfax. The town was in Osage County, which doesn't mean anything to anybody in this room, but in Oklahoma, everybody knows that Osage County is the largest county in the state, and it's larger than Rhode Island. So it was a big, wide open place, and this was prairie country. Mm-hmm. When I first came to Georgia, I was feeling real claustrophobic, and I couldn't figure it out. Everything's as old as trees. I wasn't used to them. But it was a great place to be raised as a child. But once you were raised, there wasn't anything for you to do unless you worked at the dime store or worked in the oil fields, or your daddy had a lumber yard or whatnot. So everybody in my class, except maybe 6 or 7 left, excuse me, most of them went to California. I got disoriented and came to Georgia. But,
so what year exactly were you born?
I was a 37 model.
37.
Yeah.
So you're leaving home when about 1960, early 60s?
I got out of graduate school in 1959.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm in the wrong decade. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you've been leaving there in the mid-50s.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. How close were you to, you knew Native Americans growing up, I assume.
Yeah.
How close were you to the reservations?
There are no reservations in Oklahoma.
Okay.
Yeah. Osage County had the unique distinction of being what at one time was the Osage Reservation.
Uh-huh.
And but after statehood, all reservations were canceled out. But in any event, the Osages, they had a smart lawyer when they went into the statehood process. And the lawyer put into the treaty that they could sell their land individually, but the tribe always retained the mineral rights. So you would drive by my uncle's ranch, and there'd be old wells pumping right out his front door, it seemed like. And every time they struck another well out there, he'd curse and be quite distressed. Because all he got was property damage. Mm. But all the oil didn't go to him, even though he owned the land. It went to the Osage Indians. And even as late as when I was in high school, the Osages in the history books were the wealthiest people in the world, per capita income. All of that changed with Dubai and Emirates and all the Arab stuff, you know. But that was true up until at least the late 1950s.
But they're still doing pretty good, I guess.
Well, they pumped all the oil out, but they water flooded it and they got another boost. And what the deal is, if you're on the tribal roll, each member has what they call a head right, and then all the oil they pump out in 1 month, and the money comes in, then based upon how many head rights, they send the money to each individual. It's kind of interesting. When I was a kid, I had no racial prejudice. A lot of the older people in town were prejudiced toward Indians. But people of my generation, the biggest pastime was to chase down an Indian girl, marry her, so you get the head right. Or white girls chasing Indian boys down because they had head rights. And all of my Indian friends back in the 50s when I was in high school, they drove Cadillacs and Buicks, and there weren't any foreign cars back then. So the rest of us were still on a bicycle, you know, trying to raise enough money to get an old used car. So it was interesting. But the lesson I learned there, and it's a good one, that if you have enough money, people don't care whether you're black, white, chartreuse, or whatever. You're in demand.
So were the schools integrated? I mean,
no.
Well, what about Cherokee or Osage and
Osage used to go to school with us, and they probably considered it that we should think it a treat to be able to go to school with them. Yeah. But we did have a black community in town. Proverbially, they lived across the tracks, and they had to ride a bus every day to Pawhuska, which was 30 miles away. So they had a 60-mile round trip, and they lived within a mile of the high school. And, you know, at the time, I never thought anything about it. I thought they enjoyed riding the bus. What did I know? Sure. Just a chuckle-headed kid, you know.
Well, now, you mentioned an uncle that had a ranch. Did you all have a farm, or where did you grow up? What kind of background did you come out of?
Well, I grew up, I was a town boy.
Okay.
My mother had this big 2-story apartment house, and that's where we lived. And then I had one uncle who was a farmer, the other one was a rancher. And the one who was a rancher, about the time I was a freshman in high school, in the summer months, I would work for him. Actually, he was a rancher, a farmer, had bulldozers, and in the lean months, he would build ponds for all these ranchers with these bulldozers. So he was kind of diversified. But my brother and I, I'll tell you an interesting story here. After the wheat harvest out there, then what you immediately began to do, because there's no rain in Oklahoma, something like 6 inches a year, and but right after the harvest, we would start plowing up the wheat stubble in these big wheat fields. And my brother, now this is for my uncle, and my brother, he would work like from 6 in the evening till 6 the next morning, driving that tractor all night long. Then I'd be out there at 6 in the morning to relieve him, and then I'd get off at 6 in the evening. It wasn't 3 shifts, it was 2. But one night, I was on the tractor for a week at night, and you'd go round and round just all night long. And you'd look behind you, and there'd be coyotes back there waiting for you to kick up a rabbit or a rat or something. And those tractor lights were only about as good as from here to Sherrill. So it was a little spooky out there. Well, one night, just another night grind, and I was out there going round and round. And suddenly I saw these headlights coming across the field. Now we were 15 miles from town, probably 5 miles to the nearest Indian. I mean, nobody out there. I'm thinking, what in the world is going on here? And you know, I could feel the hair on the back of my neck saying, I was spooked. So the car came up next to me, and it was my uncle, 2 o'clock in the morning. He said, thank God you haven't got to it. I said, what are you talking about? What are you doing out here? I thought he was checking to see if I was working, you know, or asleep under the tractor. He said, get in the car with me. So we drove out in the middle of that wheat field, and there was about an acre of what looked to me, as I remember, like little cactus. Well, this particular land didn't belong to my uncle. He leased it from an Indian, a full-blooded Osage Indian. And that was his peyote patch. And I would have plowed it up by daylight, you know. My uncle said, I woke up in a cold sweat and said, oh my God. And he lived about 10 miles on the other side of town. So he had to come out about 25 miles to get there. And so he put stakes in the ground. We're out there at 2 o'clock in the morning, put stakes around Simon's peyote patch. His name was Simon Henderson, the old Indian. And he was a peyote preacher. And in Native American circles, That's an important person.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the peyote is a big part of the religion.
It's a big part of the 60s, too.
Yeah. Well, this is long before then. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you're innocent.
Well,
of all
if
that
I
at
had
the time.
known what I know now, I'd have been out there harvesting and putting it aside till the 60s got here, you know.
Okay, so you leave Oklahoma, you go straight to the University of Georgia? Or?
No, I went to Oklahoma State University.
Okay. How long did you stay there?
2 years, and my transcript looked like a drunken chicken going across there. My mother, who was a widow, and she put the law down. She said, I'll give you one more semester. Get your grades up and get serious about college or come on back. Whoa. The law had spoken. So I transferred down to Northeastern State, good little school. Matter of fact, it was a pre-med school, what it's known for. And I went to summer school. I couldn't find a job. And I got serious. And I was also ready to get serious. For 2 years, I had just meandered through the wilderness like a lot of college freshmen. And so I didn't know whether I had any brains or not. So I decided to see if I had any brains, and I applied myself. I made 2 A's and a B that summer. So mother's happy. But then later, my mother was, her family was Mennonite, so they were very stoic people. And she always had, she always was spare with words. But when she said something, you remembered it. For example, when I was a junior in college down in Tahlequah, Northeastern, I got this letter from my mother, and it said, "Dear son, please give up drinking and smoking. I have given up eating and send you to school down there. Love, Mom." Now, if she had gone on and on 3 or 4, I'd thrown it away, you know. But
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So you're down where the Cherokees are now at Northeast Oklahoma.
That's right.
Okay.
When they were booted out of Georgia, that was their new capital in Oklahoma, was Tahlequah.
Right.
And they had a college there. And the central building of the old Cherokee seminary is still a class. That was a classroom building there.
Really?
Yeah.
You had classes in there?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It was a big building.
Wow. Okay, so how long did you stay there?
2 years.
So you graduated from there?
Yeah, actually, I was only there a year and a half. I got out of college in 4.5 years, not because I was smart. I simply went to summer school.
Right.
So I got out of school in December of '59,
Okay.
and then this was during the draft.
59.
So now the military is staring me in the face. But back in those days, they had a program that you could go into the military for 6 months active duty, and then 5.5 years reserve duty.
Yeah.
Well, I got in the National Guard when I was in high school. So I already had most of that done. So I went into the Army for 6 months. My military was over with. So the last year of what should have been college was my military. And then from there I went on to Tennessee.
Okay. Now I knew you went to Peabody. I guess I was thinking Georgia fit in there somewhere, but I guess I've got it all mixed up.
Well, from Tahlequah, Northeastern, graduated. Then Army's out of the way. So now it's fall. And I'm just out of the Army.
Yeah.
And time for school to start again. So my hero in undergraduate school was this history professor, and he had gone to school at Peabody at Nashville. Peabody's right across the street from Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
And now Peabody is Vanderbilt. They acquired the college. But in any event, that's why I went to school there. That's where my hero went to school. And that was a great decision on my part.
So you knew you wanted to teach at that point? 'Cause
No.
we think of Peabody as a school of education.
Yeah. I think about 8 out of every 10 people there. I didn't know what my high school principal told me, he said, get a degree in school administration, which I did. I have never used that degree. Bad advice there. But it did open some doors for me. Mm-hmm. So I had a degree in that and a minor in history.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's what you got at Peabody too?
Yeah.
Or
both.
At both places? Okay, so you get through Peabody in 59?
Yeah.
And then is that when you get to Georgia?
Yeah, I finally get to Georgia.
Okay, so you get a job and that brings you to Georgia. Right?
Well, there's a good story there.
Okay.
You say time is no problem, huh? I've been on my mother's payroll for 5 years now, and guilt was finally seeping in. So some recruiters came up from Georgia, came up to Peabody to recruit teachers for down here. And so I interviewed with them, and they offered me a job in DeKalb County, and I took it. Well, I thought it was the smartest thing I'd ever done. DeKalb County was the highest paying school district in the entire South, except for Dade County, Florida, which is Miami. $4,000 a year, not a month now, but a year. And Miami paid $4,200, I found out. But in any event, I signed a contract. I'm going to Georgia in a few weeks. So I called my mother to let her know I finally have a job and I'm off the payroll. My mother was a postal worker. Her career was in the post office. And she always admonished me that don't ever use that telephone unless there's an emergency. The 3-cent stamp is available. In other words, write, don't call. So I thought, hey, this is worth a phone call. But this is odd. Here I have a master's degree and I don't know how to make a long distance phone call. I'd never made one. So I called the operator and told her I wanted to call long distance, and I told her where and the number. And I said, be sure you understand this is collect. I couldn't pay for it. I didn't even have a telephone. I had to use a payphone, I guess. But in any event, I heard the operator say, my mother answered the phone. She was always home, so I knew she'd be there. And the operator said, we have a J.B. Tate who wants to make a collect phone call. Will you accept the charges? And there was this big pregnant pause. I thought, she's not going to accept the charges. And she said, yes. She said, son, are you in an accident? No. Why are you calling long distance? I said, I am so thrilled to let you know that I've got a job. She said, where? I said, Georgia. And she said, son, that's the most backward state in America. You got to keep in mind this was 1959. I said, no, it's not. Mississippi is. So we got in this long distance argument. I said, besides, I always wanted to work in a third world country. But so they got me here. We're here now.
Okay, so you're in DeKalb County, and before long you were up in Fulton County too, aren't you?
Yeah,
at Milton High School.
Yeah, at a new teachers meeting when I first came down here. A young lady from Peabody that I knew pretty well. Mm-hmm. She had a new roommate, so she introduced me to her roommate. Her name was Nan, and so Nan taught on the north end of DeKalb County. I was on the south end at Southwest DeKalb, which is an all-black school today, but it's all white when I was there. Now this is an interesting aside. When I came to Georgia, I had to sign, again, a contract, the real contract. And it said that if I taught a black person, I would be fired. That was a condition of employment in Georgia at that time.
That's kind of unlikely if you're at Southwest High School, isn't it?
Well, no, it's all white.
That's what I'm saying. It would be kind of unlikely that you'd
well,
have a black
this
person.
was their line of defense with segregation.
Yeah.
But in any event, a year later, Nan and I got married, So I wanted to get, there's quite a commute from DeKalb County all the way up to Cross Keys up in the north end of.
That's where she was?
Yeah. So somebody told me that there was an opening in Fulton County and at Alpharetta. So I called the county office and they said, call the principal up there, Vic Hansard. Talk to him, so I did. And Mr. Hansard said, yeah, I'd like to interview you. He said, are you busy Sunday? I said, oh no. So Nan and I drove up there to Alpharetta Sunday. God, that was backwoods back then. As one of my students up at Alpharetta said, Alpharetta's not the end of the world, but you can see it from here. So he told me to meet him at the high school, Mr. Hansard. So I drove it to high school, and I'm sitting there waiting, and it's deserted, it's Sunday. So pretty soon I see a horse and a rider coming off in the distance. It was Mr. Hansard. I got hired on horseback. We interviewed, he was on his horse, I was sitting there talking to him. He said, I think this is going to work out. You got a job. So I was there for 7 years.
Now, I think the first time I knew you, went out and visited you once on, I think you had 40 acres in North Fulton County, didn't you, or something like that?
It's actually right across the county line in Cherokee County.
Oh.
Yeah.
But you did have 40 acres?
35.
35.
Yeah.
It was big.
Yeah. Well, it was. It was an odd-shaped piece of land. And from the county road back to my house is a half mile. So it looked bigger. Yeah, it looked bigger than it really was. Yeah.
Okay, so you stay, what'd you say, 7.5 years at?
7 years.
7 years at Milton High School. And there's a story about you could have been a charter faculty member at Kennesaw Junior College, but you weren't. Why don't you tell that story?
Yeah, well, they just built Kennesaw, a little junior college. And so I got an interview over there with Dr. Beggs. So I lived out in the country, and I allowed myself, I thought, plenty of time to get there. I couldn't find the college. I knew it was close within a few miles. And I'd stop at service. They said, we've heard of it, but we don't know where it is.
Well, now, the new campus wasn't open yet at that time, was it?
Well, that's where they held the interview.
Oh, at the campus?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I finally found it. And I was 30 minutes late from the job interview. So I came in and told Dr. Beggs, I am so apologetic, but I couldn't find it. He laughed. He said, nobody can find this place. I-75 didn't exist. And Kennesaw was, they used to call it the College in the Pines, because it was away from everybody back then. And so I interviewed with Dr. Beggs and then the college president, Dr. Sturgis, and they offered me the job. I said, I don't think so. I was having a great time teaching high school. I had this wonderful class, Diane. She went with me. Every time they've had a reunion over the years, they always invite me. And but it was the best class I ever taught, and I'm still close to those people. They're going to eat at this place down the street here sometime in the next few weeks, and they invited me to come and have lunch with them. So it was a great experience. So I was having such a good time, I thought, why? But I also had to take a $1,200 pay cut to go from high school to college teaching. That got my attention. $1,200 was...
Especially if you're only making $4,000 or something.
Yeah, well, it improved a bit. Not a whole lot, though. $1,200 was a lot of money at the time. But in any event, I turned the job down. And so the next year at Milton High School in Alpharetta, it was a crop failure. It's like some demonic force tilted the campus. All the dregs came into my classroom. That was the longest year of my life. So I inquired about Kennesaw again, and fortunately a friend of mine Did you ever know Mary Beth Hankey?
No.
It's Ann Pullen's cousin. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Her husband was back from overseas, and they were going to another California, I guess. But anyway, she was leaving Kennesaw, so I applied for the job again, and they gave it to me again. But Dr. Sturgis told me, he said, "You will not be offered this job a third time." I said, "I'm yours." Yeah.
Okay, so you started at Kennesaw Junior College in 1967.
That's right.
Which was the second year of operation. Why don't you talk a little bit about teaching at Kennesaw Junior College? What was it like back then? You said it's way out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
What about the students and what about the standards? Was it a tough place?
It was a tough place. What had happened was a few years before Kennesaw opened, DeKalb Junior College opened, and it got the reputation real quick of just being the 13th year of high school. So Kennesaw was determined not to replicate that mistake. In other words, what they wanted was a college with high standards. So Dr. Beggs, who was my supervisor, he said, "Don't worry about the kill rate, the mortality rate with students." He said, "We want high standards." Now, they had an open enrollment policy. If you graduated from high school, Kennesaw would take you. Didn't mean they'd keep you, but they would take you. And I believed in that, to give anybody a chance, you know. And so you were asking about the students. Nearly all of our students came from, I guess you'd say, lower middle class background. That is to say that very few of their parents had ever gone to college. They were first generation college students. But when I graduated from college, most people had not gone to college across America. So it wasn't unusual. But you see a lot of empty places out in the parking lot as a quarter. We were on the quarter system. By the end of the quarter, no problem finding a place to park. Those who couldn't.
They didn't make it through the quarter.
They didn't make it through the quarter.
You've got a funny story about the streakers. Tell about that.
Yeah, that's. Let's see. It was 1967 when I went to Kennesaw, and Georgia was real quiet. Now, conversely, a year and a half, 2 years earlier, I got a scholarship to Harvard for one semester. And I was sitting in the classroom in the Harvard Business School, taking notes. The door was open, and these strange-looking people came right by the door, going up the staircase. I thought they were actors in a play. What I was seeing was my first hippies. And but it was 3 years later before I saw a hippie in Atlanta, or even later at Kennesaw. So it was. By the end of the decade, it was an interesting place to work. So one day, and back in those days, since we were not a dormitory school, they had a break between 12 and 1 so that students could go to clubs and feel like there's more to college, just parking and taking notes and leaving. But the word spread like a wildfire. There's going to be streakers on campus. Well, there were streakers in Berkeley and University of Georgia. We were the cow's tail, the dead end, to get on that bandstand. So they're supposed to streak out at the quadrangle. The quadrangle is a square and a flagpole in the middle, and the library, the student center, everything was around the quadrangle. So 12 o'clock, I didn't have, we had a free hour. So all the faculty's out there, lots of students, but no streakers. I mean, all the way around the quadrangle, there's probably about 7 to 10 deep of people. And half the town of Marietta came out to see naked kids, you know. So after about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, this is a big hoax. Nothing's going to happen. And then suddenly on the far end of where I was, over at the science building, this big roar of noise went up, and this naked female ran out to the flagpole and did a little dance around the flagpole. And she had a ski mask on. But here's the kicker. We only had about 1,200 students maybe at that time. And we only had one redhead on campus, and that was her. And as she ran around, people said, "Oh my God, it's Eleanor."
Now, didn't she go in to visit Dr. Sturgis after that?
Then she ran through the administration building. It's where the president is. And he was a very up straight type guy. You know, if you said shucks, he'd faint. One of those. But right after she left, about 5 athletes, jocks, they ran out naked, ski mask on, did their little thing around the flagpole. They ran to the administration building, and as I remember, they went into Dr. Sturgis's office, the president. And why he didn't have a heart attack's beyond me. Then they went on out to the parking lot.
There's a plane that came over too.
Oh, yeah, don't forget the plane. We didn't know whether there's going to be more or was it over. So we're all standing there. Off the distance, I hear an airplane. And it's getting closer and closer. And it comes right down. I thought it was going to hit the flagpole. It came in so low. And fortunately, we didn't have big buildings. It wouldn't have made it. But they had the door off the plane, and this naked guy's hanging out of the plane. We had an aerial streaker. And so then he flew on, and that was it. You know, that was it. But the pilot of the plane, of all things, was one of my students. And he was a mousy-looking little guy. If you had a lineup of 100 young men, said which one was the pilot, he would be dead last one that you'd pick out, being a kamikaze pilot. Yeah.
Well, now, I remember you were great about taking students and faculty as well up on canoeing trips on the streams of North Georgia.
Oh, yeah, I did.
And you did a lot of things with students. Why don't you talk about some of those things?
One of the roughest days I had in my life was when I turned 30. I was at Kennesaw, and this was at the height of the counterculture movement.
Don't trust anybody over 30.
That's right. You cannot trust anybody over 30. I thought, my God, yesterday I could be trusted. Today I can't. You know? So that birthday kind of bothered me because I had a good relationship with a lot of students, and it turned out it didn't matter. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with. You know, back in those days, we were still a small college, and I take students, just a handful of us, we go to historical sites, but the thing that really was big was the canoe club, and thank God I didn't know anything about liability back then. So we'd go up to near Dahlonega. It's the Etowah River. It's called the Upper Etowah because it's got some white water and a waterfall going across there. So that was my favorite place to take them. But when we get up there, I tell those students, I said, you all can drink beer, which was legal back then. I said, but don't smoke dope in my presence because I could lose my job, and just don't do it. And they were good about that. So every time we would stop and take a 30-minute break, half of them would be off in the woods. Next thing you knew, smoke was boiling out of the woods. It looked like a tribe of Indians back there. Then they'd come back and we'd paddle for some more, you know. But Yeah, we had a lot of
You
fun.
didn't ask questions.
No, don't ask, don't tell. Yeah.
Okay.
Just don't do it in front of me.
Yeah. So what did you stay at Kennesaw about 30 years or 25 years?
25, I guess.
And then you had your years from Milton's. And
Yeah.
so you had over 30 years in the retirement
I had
system, I guess.
33, I think.
So,
32 or 33.
so 25, this would be up like the early 90s that you
90,
retired?
93, yeah.
Okay.
That's when I retired from
How
Kennesaw.
had Kennesaw changed by that time?
Oh, it was, Kennesaw's reinvented itself many times since I've been down here. It was, you'd have to help me on that one. In 93, I'm sure we had close to, 20,000 maybe?
Yeah, not quite yet.
Not quite, yeah.
We're well over 10,000.
But Kennesaw was becoming a big place, and a lot of new buildings had gone up while I was there, and certainly a lot have gone up since I left. I was down there a while back. I couldn't find my way around. It's a strange feeling.
It's hard to believe you've been retired 20 years now.
Oh, yeah, yeah. True story, though.
Yeah. Well, when did you get up to Bartow County? When did you first move up here?
I moved up here and lived up here in the 70s for 5 years.
Oh.
Then I moved back, I moved to Marietta.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there 5 years or so. And then I was going through a divorce, and I remembered how much I liked Bartow County and how much I didn't like Marietta.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a motivation to come back up here. But I'd been here before.
Did you live in Cartersville or elsewhere in Bartow County? Where'd you live? In the 70s?
No, I live south of here.
Yeah.
I've always managed to live in the country, either on a farm or
south of here, off
about 9 miles south of here on Pumpkin Vine Creek.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what was Bartow County like in the 70s?
It was very much in the mainstream of towns of its size. If you wanted to go eat, you had to go to Marietta. The only place was Ross's Diner and the four-way and a couple of, maybe at least one drive-in.
So Ross's Diner and the four-way and a drive-in.
Yeah, it wasn't much here.
Yeah.
But other than that, you've got everything here but Olive Garden today.
Yeah. So McDonald's hadn't even reached Cartersville in the 70s.
The four-way was McDonald's.
Yeah, and of course the interstate got completed in '77.
Yeah.
From Cartersville down to North Marietta Parkway, I guess.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that I'm sure that changed things big time after the interstate was here.
Not overnight, but it didn't take long. But before you saw a lot of back in the early '70s, I could go to say Kroger's, or they had an A&P. And it's not that I knew these people, but I knew who they were. Maybe 60, 70% of the people in the store, I'd recognize them. And then I go to the store today, and if I see one person, I know it's unusual. All these new people have come in here.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like all your career you were interested in local history and out in the woods finding historic sites and things of that sort. Why don't you talk about what Bartow County was like historically and the kinds of things that you were doing with students and writing papers and all that kind of, or making speeches and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I taught an upper level course at Kennesaw in the Civil War for juniors and seniors. So I would take them on 2 field trips, sometimes 3, and one of them was Bartow County. And but in the meantime, I had met a lot of people here in this county, and some of them owned these pre-Civil War antebellum homes, and they would allow me to take my students out, and they would show, give them a tour through the house, and then I'd take them down to Alatoona Pass, the battlefield, up to Cassville, and several places, and that I had already known about. But in any event, one field trip was up to Chickamauga, and the other one was over at Roswell, which had a lot of places. And I'd lived in Roswell at one time. But the students in their evaluation of the course at the end of the semester, the field trip they enjoyed the most was always Bartow County. Yeah.
Why do you think that was so?
There's just more interesting things up here, and it's I think more than anything, Bartow County is just loaded with Civil War history, pre-Civil War history, post-Civil War, and in Atlanta it's all been bulldozed away, and in Marietta, about the only thing you have left that the public knows about is a national park.
So it's 1978 that we started offering upper level classes at Kennesaw. So I guess by 78 or 79, you're taking students on these field trips.
Yeah, I used to take just a handful, and then I was taking a whole. It's a carrot and a stick. Take a stick, and whip them, or a carrot and entice them. So if they went on the field trips, they got credit, and that was a pretty stiff course. So I never had a problem having full house for a field trip.
Yeah.
And a lot of them had never had any exposure to that type of thing.
Well, what did we have in Bartow County back then that's been lost since then in terms of historic sites?
There's a number of pre-Civil War homes that are either through benign neglect, they just fell in, or arson, or just fire. A combination of several reasons. But mostly what we've lost is a lot of houses. But we also have some success stories too.
Well, talk about what you've done to maybe make some of these success stories happen.
Well, it wasn't me, but it was a joint effort. I was along for the ride, and sometimes provided some leadership to that. Well, for example, the first thing I did when I moved back up here was to join the Etowah Valley Historical Society. I didn't belong to it previously when I lived here, but at this point I'm pretty much steeped in local history.
So this is like mid-'80s when you moved back?
This would have been, no, I moved back here in 93.
93, when you retired?
Yeah.
You didn't live up here until you retired?
Well, I lived here for
the second time?
The second time, first time was in the 70s.
Right.
For 5 years.
Okay.
But I wasn't interested in local history
at that time.
Just
okay.
Some odds and ends.
So, so the rest of your teaching career, you're living in Marietta.
Yeah.
Until 93.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you may want to rethink that. Well, at any rate.
What?
88. Moved in this house in 1988.
Oh, okay.
91.
I was thinking yeah.
Well, we can't remember everything.
Hey, we just...
I didn't think that was right that you were telling me, but it's your story, I guess. So.
Hey, you don't win them all.
All right. So you moved into this house sometime, at any rate.
Yeah.
And you and Diane got married in 91?
Yeah.
You remember that?
Vaguely.
Yeah, I was pretty sure when you retired that you were already living here. Okay, so, well, it doesn't matter. Sometime in that period, at any rate, is when you got involved with the Etowah Valley Historical Society. Okay.
And, but there's a story there too. When I joined the Etowah Valley Historical Society, I found out pretty quickly that it was an organization for the landed gentry in this county. That regular people were not enticed to join. And we had less than 100 members. I don't know what, but it's less than 100. And there was some dissension in the society about that very thing. That the only thing the society really did back then was to have a couple of dinners, maybe 3, at some pre-Civil War mansion or house, and that was it. Well, and there were some members on the board that were unhappy with that. And so I got elected to the board. And so those of us who felt that there should be more to a historical society than a couple of dinners a year, we started to work on that. And then some good things began to happen. At one point, just a few years after that, our membership was around 400 people.
It's a big improvement.
A big improvement. But we had to work it and beat the bushes to get people to join. And people who had lived here all their life, some of them professional people that had never joined. So we put them on a guilt trip. And people like Diane and others got on the phone, and so it was a big recruitment effort.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, we had a good newsletter. We had something for them, and we got three books republished dealing with Bartow County history, and so we had something to offer people other than a couple of dinners.
Now, I guess one of the houses that's been lost since you were here in the 70s was the Howard House, wasn't it? Francis Howard, In and Out of the Land. Well, that's one of the books you published, wasn't it? Was In and Out of the Lands.
Yeah.
So, I remember you taking me out years ago to those man's across the street.
Yeah.
In cement, I guess.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk a little bit about what's been done up in that part of the county?
Springbank is approximately 40 acres, and it belongs to the county now. At the time I took you up there, probably it belonged to a timber company, and it was also a haven for rednecks and scumbags and God knows. When I first started going up there, people said, "Be careful! They're growing dope back there in those woods, and some pretty unsavory characters." But the timing was perfect. Roy Barnes was governor, and this was when the state was in better condition financially. And Roy Barnes, I think there's 16 counties in the metropolitan area that the legislature appropriated quite a bit of money for these 16 counties to buy what they call green space, so that that whole area wouldn't just be, cookie cutter subdivisions everywhere. And so each county got so much money based on population. So Bartow County is going to get a wad of money, and they have a hearing up here at the Civic Center for people in the community to make recommendations as to where we should try to buy areas and preserve them. And one of the criteria was that the site have some historic significance, if possible. Excuse my voice here. So I attended that meeting, and I made the recommendation that Springbank be purchased. And then the bureaucracy, it went off into Never Land for a while. And then I really don't remember how this came about, but I was contacted about Springbank, and so then we called the CEOs of the timber company to see if they'd be amenable to selling some of that, and they were. and we got it for a bargain based on today's prices. But in any event, I took the county commissioner and his people up to Springbank, and we walked around the whole thing. And a friend of mine, David Archer, is an attorney, and so the way he figures in this, he did all the legal work pro bono, and that was a big plus there. So the county commissioner, he said, let's buy this place. I'd ridden in his car up there to look at it. I said, let's do. But it's probably the most historic spot in the whole county for everything that's happened up there historically.
You want to talk a little bit about what makes it historical?
Yeah, we could do that. A man by the name of Charles Wallace Howard, he was kind of a Thomas Jefferson of his era. He was everything. He had a degree from Yale Divinity School, so he was a man of the cloth, and he was a scientific farmer. He was an agronomist, and he published a newspaper for farmers. And of course, Georgia was totally rural back then, but mostly it was about rotation of crops and
progressive agriculture.
Yeah. And he was also an educator. He was instrumental in bringing Oglethorpe University online, and also taught there. Mm-hmm. And he also, at his home, he had a girls' finishing school. They built wings on his house. And that was where the classes dormitory, I'm not sure which now. But in any event, there were no public schools before the Civil War. So if you wanted to get a good education, you had to go to an academy or something like Mr. Howard's School. That was a finishing school for young women. Martha Berry went to school there, and her two sisters. So it was well known throughout Northwest Georgia.
So I guess that's how Frances Howard got her literary abilities.
Yeah.
That would have been his daughter.
That was his daughter, and she was a teacher there. And she wrote a book about Springbank called In and Out of the Lines. And it's an unusual book because it was about the experience of the Howard family during the Civil War. Now, Mr. Howard went to war. He was a captain. But the women stayed behind to try to protect the place from the Yankees. And but as you know, the Yankees occupied the place and camped out there and whatnot. So her whole story was about what it was like for women in the Civil War behind enemy lines. And having read an awful lot of Civil War stuff, most books are about battles and generals and so on and so forth. Very few books written of this genre of women and what happened to them during the war.
And she's very gutsy. She goes down to Savannah to try to find her father. That's the in and out of the lanes of it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, he was wounded and convalescing over in Athens for a while, too.
Yeah, she goes through Athens.
Yeah.
I remember that.
She had a sister who lived in Savannah.
Okay. I know you were involved in the preservation of In the Valley, which is the Cara Harris house up in the northern part of the county. And why don't you talk a little bit about Jody Hill and how all that came about?
Well, Jody Hill, who owned the Cora Harris property, the famous authoress, and wrote all those books and articles. And by the way, when Cora Harris was in her prime as a writer, she would be in magazines with people like mental block there.
Like Margaret Mitchell?
No, I was thinking more like the guy who shot himself.
Her husband?
No,
Oh,
a famous
Who else shot himself?
for whom the bell tolls.
Oh, Hemingway.
Yeah, she'd have equal billing, and also F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Uh-huh.
There'd be F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, and yeah, she was right with him.
Mm-hmm.
And
You mean in terms of popularity?
well, be on the same magazine.
In the same magazine
Yeah,
as them?
it was equal coverage.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But in any event, she died, I think, in the early 1930s.
35, I believe.
35.
Yeah, I think so.
And then these two sisters, that she really kind of semi-raised them, and she left the property to them. And then eventually, I guess they died, and then the property was sold again. A fellow by the name of Archer owned it, and it had really, he wasn't interested in history and couldn't care less about.
Archer? What's his name?
That was his, Mr. Archer, yeah.
Yeah.
But he used to give me permission to go up there, and I could have carried away half the stuff in that library. And
Wasn't related to your friend, was
not
it?
related to my friend at all.
Okay,
no.
that's good. Well,
But in any event, Mr. Archer sold it, and but at this point, the place had kind of become dilapidated. And Jody Hill, who's from, I think he was raised out in Atco. He
oh, wow, yeah.
and he had spent most of his life in California, but he was from Bartow County. And then I guess when he retired, he came back here to Marietta. But it had always had a soft spot for Bartow County and its history, and was always active in the Historical Society. Well, he just grieved over what had happened to the Cora Harris property. And somebody told him that somebody wanted to buy it and put chicken houses up there. So that was it. Mm-hmm. He got busy and purchased the property. I think there's over 200 acres.
Not quite that much.
Not quite that much. Okay. But he got the Cora Harris house and several buildings that she had added to it. Mm-hmm. And the Cora Harris house, at least it's in Lucy Cunnis's official history of Bartow County, was that the original Cora Harris house was a Cherokee Indian cabin, and for different reasons I think it's accurate. Now that it belonged to Chief Pinelog, who knows, you know. But, but in any event, it was a treasure well worth saving.
And then she greatly expanded that from the cabin into the house that's there today.
Yeah.
Cora Harris did that.
Yeah. And the reason she bought it, her husband had committed suicide, I think within a quarter of a mile or a half mile of there. And she felt like when she was on that property, she felt close to him. And so that was her motivation, because God knows back then, 35, that was all gravel roads and probably all but impossible to negotiate during the winter months. But in any event, Jody Hill bought the property, and he told me one time he'd spent over $1 million upgrading everything there, the barns, the houses, the land.
Well, there's a really nice library, a separate building library, a chapel and whatever.
Yeah.
So what was your part in all of this?
Well, for years, I don't know how many years, but Jody and I get in a conversation, and Jody's, my God, he was in World War II, so he's up there. And he said, you know, my children, I can't leave it to them, they're not interested. And they've done well, they got their own places. And nobody in Bartow County, like the Historical Society, that would be an albatross around our neck to have it. But people who had deep pockets that could maintain it, nobody was interested. That's why he bought it. Now what to do with it? So I had a conversation with him one time, and I said, you know, why don't you give it to Kennesaw State University and let them manage it, and they can have seminars up here and classes and nature-related subjects like biology. And so I really don't remember how all that transpired, except he was interested. And then I think I got in touch with the presidents of the people below him, who were in maybe the
Well, the development people like Wes Wicker, I believe.
he was one of them, yeah.
Yeah.
So they began to court Jody, and I went with him a few times, and other times they went with him up there. And
Now, Jody had a nephew, or has a nephew, who's tied to both Kennesaw and the Etowah Valley Historical Society, I believe.
oh yeah, Joe Head.
Yeah.
And Joe should get, you know, some of the credit for that coming Kennesaw's way. You know, that old expression, a man is never without honor except in his own hometown. Well, I think being a nephew was not a plus, as it turned out. Sometimes a semi-stranger has better luck than blood. You know?
I see.
That was my take on it at the time.
Yeah. So at any rate, you were able to persuade him to make the offer, or to at least be willing to accept if Kennesaw made the offer?
As far as I know, that's the way it transpired.
Yeah. Okay.
But so Kennesaw State University now has that property, and I hope it all works out in their interest and Jody's interest. I've lost track of what's going on up there.
Yeah, well, there have been some classes that have gone up there and some research that has been done.
Good.
So there's some things that are still taking place. They even had some farm up there for a while for the Commons, our dining facility at Kennesaw.
Oh, okay, good.
They're not doing much up there now, but they were growing herbs and all kinds of stuff up there at one time, and some bees for honey and so on.
Yeah, well, those things kind of go in cycles. That be interest, and then people lose interest, and perks back up again.
Well, talk about the historical markers and your involvement in that.
Yeah, I've always been a fool for historical signs. I'll be riding down the highway, I see a historical marker, I pull over and I've got to relate this story. I think we're getting close to the end of this. I was out in Wyoming one time, and Nan, my first wife, we had been to California. We were coming back to Georgia, and so those are long distances. Well, in any event, she was asleep in my lap, and I saw this historical marker off in the distance, so I pulled up. It said, Sacagawea's grave, 1/2 mile from the sign. So I took a left, and this rutted road, and there was an Indian village there, and they couldn't speak English, and I couldn't speak Shoshone or whatever it was, and so I finally got across to, I want to see Sacagawea's grave. Well, in the meantime, Nan had waked up. She said, "Where are we?" I said, "We're going to see Sacagawea's grave." She said, "Sacagawea? Wasn't she the founder of the Girl Scouts?"
Just a little bit off.
I filed that one away.
Okay.
But back to these historical markers. I sat down one evening, and I came up with about 22 sites in Bartow County that deserved a historical marker. So this is probably my last burst of energy to do anything. I got energized on that and did some research for each marker and wrote them out. And then a state historical marker costs about $5,000 now.
Mm.
And J.B. Tate doesn't have those kind of deep pockets. But we had done some local markers up at Kingston 10 years or so ago. And they're still in good repair, still look good. And those run about $140. And they're attractive for what you get. So what I did, I made a deal with the people who make these markers. And then once the marker was made, then you had to have a pole for it to be attached to. So a friend of mine who has an interest in history, he has a welding shop. So he gave me a cut rate price on that. And so I think about $15 a pole. So we got it down where it's affordable. And then I began to get on the phone and call people and say, well, you need to sponsor one of these markers. So I paid for one, but the rest of them, somebody in the community paid for them. And then I hired this guy. He and I spent a whole day putting them up. And Jeannie's male friend has one in his front yard. Chulio.
So how many markers do you have up now?
I think we have a total of 12.
12.
And about 12 to go.
Right. And you've been president of the Etowah Valley Historical Society?
Yeah, back in, I think, 90 to 92, somewhere along there.
One term was enough for you?
Well, we had some good people. So I wanted to make, one term was enough. Then I ended up on the board again, and that was a good experience.
Great. Well, I think we wanted to find out a little bit about your family and children and so on, grandchildren, I guess.
Oh, yeah. I was kidding somebody a while back. I told them I have 4 grandkids, and 3 of them I set money aside for their education, higher education. Said the 4th one, I put money aside for his legal defense fund. Actually, he's going to be okay, and kid's a near genius, but his mother was. She was like the valedictorian of a class of about 800 kids. My son's like me. He's an overachiever with limited faculties. But in any event, I have 4 grandsons, all boys, grandsons.
So you had all boys for sons and all boys for grandsons.
Yeah. And all my uncles on the Tate side had boys. We had a old maid English teacher when I taught at Milton.
Yeah.
I was kidding her. I said, she wasn't married. I said, if you ever want a son, I guarantee you one. She was used to my sense of humor.
Okay.
My oldest son he's a pilot with United Airlines, and he wears 2 hats. He's also a lieutenant colonel in
and what's his name?
John.
John.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then my middle son, he's in construction up in Durham area. My third son died 2 years ago. He got that terrible N1H1 flu, and he was only 41. So I have 2 sons now.
So what? John's the first one.
Yeah, Stillman is my middle son.
Stillman?
Stillman. That was my father's name. Yeah.
Okay.
But now Stillman Robert, I told him if he didn't like his name, he could always be Robert.
Yeah.
He likes Stillman.
Oh, good.
Stayed with it.
And then the third one,
JB Jr.
J.B. Jr.
Yeah.
Okay. James
Berry.
Berry Jr. Tate
Yeah.
Jr. Okay.
Yeah, there's even a story there. My middle name, Berry. James was my grandfather's name on my mother's side. My mother was reading a novel and she's carrying me. And the villain in the novel was named Berry. And she liked that name.
Uh-oh.
Tried to live up to that a few times.
Okay, so when do you and Diane get married?
Bring him in here. Well, see, John was married in 92. I hope. I think that's right. We go through this annual confusion.
Y'all were married in 91, I believe you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
That's what she was saying? I don't think that's
So I
right.
believe John and 90 maybe?
Just go with 91.
Okay.
Let's go with 91.
Okay. That would be the safe thing.
Yeah.
Go with 91. Okay, so, and you've been living up in Cartersville even before then?
Yeah. I had his house a
Right.
couple of years before we got married.
Right. Okay. Well, what are you proudest of in your long 76-year career, almost 77?
Well, no matter what was going on in my life, teaching was my anchor. And I would like to think that I was always energized in the classroom, and I would walk into a class. I never used notes, and I think, oh God, you teach the same thing year after year, quarter after quarter, and I'd think to myself, okay, it's old to you, but it's new to them, and remind myself of that. So when I walked in there, I try to make it new to them and me too. And even though it was same old, same old. And so my teaching career is that's, I guess, what I'm proudest of. And the feedback I've had from students over the years who had no interest in history and got the bug.
Well, that might be a nice way to end the interview then.
I think it would be, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
And thank you, Tom. Tom and I go back to the summer of '42.
Just about.
All right, that was great.
Yeah, one of my favorites, one of your quotes that I always remembered early on when we were working so hard just to be prepared for the next day's class.
Oh, yeah.
You talked about staying one step ahead of the posse.
Yeah, and an hour ahead of the posse.